Welcome to Tell Me More, the all-steel podcast where design meets innovation and we explore the limitless potential of workspaces. In this exclusive series, we're peeling back the layers of workplace design. From the psychology of colors to the future of hybrid work, join us as we open doors to conversations with industry leaders, architects, and designers who redefine the modern workplace. This is Tell Me More, brought to you by Allsteel, because when it comes to designing the future, there's always more to discover.
Hello, welcome to the Tell Me More podcast. My name is Lauren Gant, and I am a Senior Workplace Advisory Manager for Allsteel, and I'm here today with my good friend and colleague, Jordan Arnold.
I'm so flattered to be a good friend and colleague.
Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Absolutely. My name is Jordan Arnold, and funnily enough, I have the exact same title as Lauren Gant. I'm a Senior Workplace Advisory Manager with Allsteel.
That's great. Jordan and I are here today. We're going to kick off a series that we have about a topic that we have been exploring for some time now and that we're both very passionate about. And I would say, you know, the whole workplace advisory team has become very passionate about, and that is the topic of trauma-informed design. And just to frame up this conversation, we have been talking about trauma-informed design as one of the three very important pillars that we're talking about regarding inclusive design. Along with neurodiversity and physical diversity, we are thinking about this idea of trauma-informed design as one of the ways that we can design inclusive spaces. When I give the 2-second overview, the 2-second elevator speech of this, I usually say that trauma-informed design is really the understanding that we all have histories and that we use our past experiences to understand our current environments and navigate our current worlds.
Yeah, I always steal, I'll shout out to Brian Colley. I always steal Brian Colley's analogy when I go through this content, and I talk about mind, body, and soul.
Yeah.
Right? Like
great.
Mind being how we process, body, how we're differently shaped and abled, and soul, the stuff that comes with us, right? The stuff that follows us through our experiences.
Yeah. And those three things are all important considerations for a meaningful and comfortable human experience.
Yeah.
So when we started this research, Jordan, we really had to first really come to the understanding of what trauma means and what it is. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So I think what's interesting is when we start talking about this topic, the biggest misconception I have found as we've had this conversation is that trauma impacts this microcosm of human beings, right? Like why would we think about this consideration set? Because we're only supporting or accommodating this small group of individuals. But I think that's a misconception, right? I think oftentimes we are only associating trauma with what we would call big T trauma, or the really obvious moments of trauma, right? Those moments that are apparently trauma I always think about it as like that fork in the road where you are never the same. It is very clear to you that if you've experienced trauma, or if you observe someone else, it's very clear that they have experienced trauma. And that absolutely is. But it is not the only kind of trauma that one can experience. So we also talk about little t trauma or complex trauma, which can be small events or moments that take place over your lifetime, right? It could be the way, if we make it about work, it could be the way that someone speaks to you. A colleague speaks to you over the course of 2 years of working with them that completely shape how you show up, shape how you feel about yourself, shape how you react to other people within the office space. And I think what's challenging is that trauma is less obvious, right? Even to ourselves.
Right.
Oftentimes as we're having this conversation, I joke about it because at the end of it becomes very self-reflective. You know, we'll talk a little bit about how we set this up a little bit later in the podcast, but it's never set up in a way that we ask people to share any of their own personal experiences. But what I find is at the end of this, we often have really open conversations about human experiences where people are self-reflecting and saying, I now understand something about myself in a deeper way, or about my experiences in a deeper way.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I agree. I mean, the statistic that is sort of out there right now is that 70% of the US population has experienced trauma at some point in their life. And through the course of this research and the conversations that we have about this every day, we have come to believe that that is probably a very low percentage of the population, just depending on how we're defining, how we're reflecting on our own experiences. Yeah, I really think of trauma as this idea that my sense of being able to cope is completely overwhelmed. It
Yep.
is something that happens too fast, too frequently, too intensely that I lose the sense that I have control in this situation. So
Hmm.
that, like, to your point, can be that one big thing or can happen, frequently in small doses. Um, and it's often hard to understand when you use that definition. It's hard to like even know something
Yeah.
about somebody's life and understand if they've internalized that as trauma.
Right. Absolutely. We can't venture to know everyone's experience. And that's something we've talked about too, is we can't know the intricacy of every human being's experience. So the best thing we can do is think globally about ways that we can
Hmm.
support the broader experience to make sure that as we consider space, that it's providing the avenues that someone might need in order to self-regulate or re-regulate, whatever it might be.
Right. Right. So given this belief that we have that and based in research, not just
Right,
our,
right.
our research, but given this understanding that trauma is so prevalent, that it's
Yep.
something that we're all sort of grappling with day to day. Um, trauma-informed design then is the idea that we are thinking of space and thinking of design in a way to empower all employees to navigate with confidence and
Yep.
calmness and a sense of well-being. And we're going to dive into specifics of how we think about that in later discussions. But in this episode, I really want to talk a little bit about how we're having this conversation. Jordan,
Yeah.
can you speak a little bit to our approach
Yeah.
and how we're sort of gently having these conversations about trauma?
Yeah. It's interesting because the word trauma in and of itself is kind of scary. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. But I think when I start this presentation, I usually start it by saying it's one of my favorite topics to
Hmm.
talk about. And that might
Same.
sound counterintuitive, right? Because it's about this big thing that feels kind of heavy. But what I always think about is the fact that this means that we're listening to each other. We're believing each other's experiences, and we're utilizing those. We're listening in a way that allows us to create space that's more meaningful. So when we open up this discussion, I'll usually let individuals know it's going to be okay. It's not going to be this heavy thing, but also we always pull up this slide that talks about starting with safety,
Hmm.
right? Starting with this idea that this work that we're doing, this moment that we're sharing, there is no requirement that anyone that's sitting there with us being a part of this conversation, there's no requirement that anyone shares anything from their own personal experience. We're talking about impacts, not events. So we talk about this idea of vulnerability without disclosure,
Right.
right? There's no ask that, like, I often share examples from my own personal experience that I feel comfortable sharing in order to frame up ideas, and I let them know that I feel comfortable with that, so I will be sharing some from my own, but there is no requirement that anyone in the room shares any piece of their personal experience. Now, like I said, oftentimes this leads to less of a conversation around events, but more of a conversation around impacts,
Hmm.
where we'll talk with individuals at the end and they'll say, hey, I realize now that A, B, or C happened to me, or that I experienced this kind of response now that I understand more about what's possible.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I like to say, like, I am not a therapist.
No,
We're not doing therapy. Like,
no,
sometimes some of my vulnerabilities leak out when I'm giving these presentations, but
yeah,
I'm not like, to your point, I'm doing that from a sense of confidence and safety. I'm not asking somebody to take care of me or
right,
um, walk me through these experiences. I also like to say that we are talking in draft in this
yep,
conversation, that we have done a ton of research. We feel super confident in what we're sharing, and every time I talk to people about this topic, I learn something new. I get a new perspective, and
hmm,
we are sharing the best and most accurate knowledge we have today, and we
yep.
want to kind of keep our ears to the ground and keep learning.
Totally. And I mean that applies even to this conversation around trauma informed design, right? Because we weren't having this conversation 2 years ago,
Right.
right? So a part of the reason that we're having this conversation now is because we were open to listen and continue to have different conversations.
Right. Right. Have you had the experience where people are a little bit off put by the word trauma?
Absolutely. Well, it's funny. As we first started talking about this, there was a lot of conversation around should we call it trauma-informed design,
Right.
right? Just the word trauma has trauma
Right.
associated with it, right? Like the word itself. And so absolutely, we've had push on it. I even talked to a client this very week who said, I think you maybe should name it something else.
Same.
And
Same.
I appreciate the feedback, but usually the way that we'll talk about it is that on one level, this is industry vocabulary, right? These are things that are being talked about within the industry, and we wanted to align on that. But I think even deeper than that, for me, I believe that if we're not willing to identify it and say it, we give it more power than it deserves.
Yeah.
Right? If we're not willing to acknowledge that it's trauma, then we are on some level covering up the reality of it or covering up the severity of the human experience. So for me, I feel comfortable saying it, and I also feel comfortable with people telling me they don't like it. And some of that is just a matter of us as human beings learning more about our experiences, to the same point that we were talking about earlier, that this becomes this kind of like self-reflective moment. If I haven't yet had that self-reflective moment, then trauma might feel heavier than it needs to,
Right.
or it might impact me in a specific way. But absolutely, that is a conversation that we continue to have. But I am continued, I don't want to say stubborn. I'm continuing to feel a bit
Strong with
stubborn,
your convictions.
strong, convicted that we made the right choice. That this is the right way to align on it. And to Lauren's point, we are speaking in draft in this moment, and we may learn in the future that it wasn't, and we need to pivot and adjust how we approach it. But I would say current state, and based on the reactions and the experiences that we've had in sharing this content over the last year and a half, I do believe it is the right choice to align around that and feel confident saying the thing that's hard, because that helps us be vulnerable with each other and have a real, meaningful, grounded conversation about the impacts.
Jordan, I just read this quote this week from Brene Brown.
Okay,
and
great.
she says something, I'm not going to quote it verbatim, but something along the lines of, we think that giving emotions or experience a name gives it power, but actually it gives us power.
Yeah.
And I think that's exactly what you just said. Like we are sort of reckoning with this, and we're sort of taking that in and understanding how we move forward from this.
So you're saying I am Brené Brown.
I think that's what I'm saying.
I'm at least 1 degree of separation away from Brené.
I think you share a brain. Yes.
I wish.
So we have heard some pushback about, do we call it trauma? Do we call it something else? And we are convicted that we are of the mindset that we, that we can call it trauma, and we can do that with sensitivity and understanding, and not making light of the situation, but certainly reckoning with this powerful word. And we're also trying to be thoughtful around the other words we use in this conversation. For example, the word that I choose to use in this conversation is activated. I choose that over the word triggered. And that's, many people do use that word, and it is, might be powerful to some people. I choose not to use it because it ultimately does have violent connotations. And it's almost even lost its like weight in our conversation. Ben used a little bit more flippantly than
I don't want to. I'm very sensitive to generational hatred, because I have a lot of love for all of the generations that exist within our space and what they've brought to it. But I will say younger generations have used the word triggered in this context specifically in a way that is soaked in sarcasm. And so when I talk about it, I never want to imply that what we're talking about isn't real, or that it's funny, or that it's a joke in any way. So just another reason why kind of pulling that vocab out of the vernacular is really important, especially in the context of this discussion.
Jordan, I was boarding a flight a couple weeks ago, and there were some teenage girls in front of me, and one said to the other, she said, "I am literally in fight or flight right now."
Oh.
And I was like, "Oh, are you? Are you?
Or are you literally in fight or flight?"
Yeah.
Did you also introduce freeze and fawn to her in that moment?
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. Let's talk about when we talk about activation, we're talking about entering a state of automatic subconscious responses that our body and our brain kind of takes to keep us safe. So when
Yep.
we perceive a threat, whether that's a real threat or that's a scary email that we
Hmm.
receive in our inbox, our bodies kind of take over and act. Do you want to talk a little bit about those four modes of dysregulation that we've been talking about?
Absolutely. So when we talk about these four, it's interesting. There's usually a little bit more understanding of the first three, and the fourth tends to be a little bit lesser known of the four. But we talk about fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Fight or flight, I think most people have an understanding of. Clearly, the young ladies in front of Lauren on the flight
I've
knew
heard
enough
of
about it
it.
to use it in probably a somewhat joking manner, or literal manner, I guess, according to her. But fight, when I talk about fight, it's this kind of, it's percussive. There's this energy to it. It could be physical, it could be verbal, it could also be all internal, right? I
Hmm.
could just feel this like push of energy, even if I don't
Hmm.
express it. Flight is the ultimate desire to remove myself from the situation. Again, I could literally be leaving the room, or I could just be overwhelmed with a feeling that I need to get out. Freeze is the quintessential deer in the headlights feeling. If I share personally, for me, when I've experienced freeze, it feels almost out of body. Like I'm watching myself
Hmm.
experience something, but I can't do anything about that situation. And then fawn is the fourth and least known of the four response types. But I find it highly relatable, and that is becoming ultimately agreeable to remove myself from a situation. If we put this in the context of the workspace, it's no, 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 I'll take care of it. You know, I'll make the PowerPoint. I'll write the email. I feel things escalating to a point where I don't want to be in that scenario anymore. So I say that I will do it, or I'll take care of it in order to no longer be in that situation.
Or I think this is an awful plan. I don't like this idea.
Right.
Everything is telling me not to go along with this, but I'm just going to say yes and go with the flow because I don't want to make waves. I just want to
Yep.
get through it this moment in time.
Right. This feels too tense. This feels too heightened, and I don't want to
Yep.
engage it anymore.
Yeah, and we've been really trying to also distinguish between personality and these trauma responses.
Right.
Some of these feel like personality traits. Somebody might be more aggressive naturally, or might
Yep.
be, more agreeable, go with the flow sort of naturally.
Yeah.
Um, Wink, wink, Jordan, right? Right, you and I.
She's not. Right. Wait.
But
Am I the aggressive
oh no, no, no. Oh, that's funny.
one?
No, I feel like we're both more of a go with the flow kind of. We'll pick
Yeah.
up the slack sort of.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to imply that you were the aggressive one. Oh, that's
Jordan's
funny.
always in fight mode. I have my
You
moments,
should
I guess.
see our text chain. So you might have personalities that
Sure.
sort of overlap this, but this is like the moment in time I'm going to get through this situation. And we can talk more about that. But so there is this very human, this very like automatic response, and I wonder, I think through our discussions we get to the point where we're relating up to our audience about why this impacts space design.
Yeah.
But do you have any thoughts around why we're having this conversation, what it means for our industry, what it means for us specifically?
I like I said, as I talk about this content overall, I'm very heartened by the fact that we're talking about it. I will say that while we've received pushback from time to time about the topic overall about the word trauma, I'm feeling when I talk to clients about this, I'm not feeling a sense of dismissiveness. I'm feeling a sense of curiosity, which to me is really exciting and telling me that the organizations that we're working with, the clients that we're talking to, we are seeing a shift to this human-centric belief that the people in the organization matter outside of the context of just ROI, outside of the context of just productivity. I am sure there's a piece in the CEO's mind that understands, I hope there is, that the more a person can show up as their most authentic self, the more that a person can show up and feel safe day to day, the more likely they are to do good work and to do good things. But I also believe, separate and outside of that, we are continuing to hear conversation about how much the human being matters on the individual level. And to me, in that moment, acknowledging this like mind, body, and soul wholeness of the person means that now is exactly the right time to be having this conversation.
Mhm.
Now is exactly the right time to be understanding more deeply what those impacts are and how we as purveyors of space, as designers of space, can directly and positively impact that.
That's beautiful. I love that. I've even spoken to a couple people over the last couple weeks that have said, I didn't know that this was what I was doing.
Yes.
I was trying to figure out how to do this. I didn't know that this existed. I was trying to figure this out. Thank you for defining it. Thank you for giving me some pathways to do this. I think it's been on some people's mind, and having some structure to it, some understanding of why and how can be really, really helpful.
Absolutely. Back to your idea, it's not only kind of, there is this piece of we need to name it and acknowledge the reality of what is there, but we don't just want to name the thing, the heavy thing that's there in front of us. We also want to think about what we can do proactively and in a meaningful way to help as a part of that process, right? To help someone move through the moment that they need to move through, potentially in a space, as we consider workplace, a space that feels exposed, a place where I might feel a sense of judgment, right? Even more so, more important sometimes maybe than when I'm at home and I'm in a space of my own ownership and
Right.
safety.
Right.
I'm going to feel more exposed and potentially more judged. So we have because we're having this conversation now, we have this moment, this opportunity to make a really, I think, major impact within that environment.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I think one thing I would like to address is this idea that we're hoping to do this in a way that feels super accessible. We understand that designers and people who are thinking about space are asked to be experts in a lot of different things these days, right?
Yep.
Sustainability and wellness and technology, and we don't mean this to be one more thing they have to be an expert in. Our hope is that we are doing this in a way that aligns with the ways that designers are already thinking, the ways people are already sort of thinking about inclusivity. We just want to sort of amp that up and educate a little bit more to sort of just turn up that dial on inclusivity even more.
Yeah.
I think that many of the things that we'll talk about are super relatable and probably things that have already been discussed in other areas. And just with a little bit extra consideration, we can sort of overlay this discussion on top of that.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think the good news about it is that what we're talking about isn't like, let's just get rid of the whole floor plate that we built before, the way that we used to think, and let's start over with something new that's more inclusive. Many of the things that we're talking about are overall considerations around well-being. But to your point, maybe there's a slight adjustment to the consideration set or a slightly different way that we're considering what that means, or even just a slightly different implication.
Yeah.
You think about like biophilia, right? We talk about biophilia overall as it relates to well-being. It's good for us as human beings to see other living things around us. But there's this added layer that sometimes we'll talk about relative to trauma-informed design, where if I see that the company that I work for cares about this living plant and is willing to keep it alive, there's a direct implication that they might be that careful about me. Right?
Yeah, it makes it feel more human. Yeah.
They might care about my livingness and my well-being if they are also willing to prioritize this living thing that I can clearly see that they're putting time and effort into. It's little things like that.
Yeah, or acoustics. We've been talking about acoustics in every space in our office environments, work environments. But, through trauma-informed design, we're thinking of acoustics slightly different. We're thinking about things like the noises from slamming doors or slamming drawers. What do footfalls sound like in the space? What, are there buzzing lights? Do the overhead lights make buzzing noises or that sort of thing. So I think it's topics that we've been thinking about, but maybe with a different lens, to your point.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think too, I just like to empower designers, A&D, our CRE folks to say, like, I feel like the people who design work environments are already putting themselves in these spaces. They're already thinking about the human experience in these spaces. And so this is not, I hope, not too far a stretch to sort of include in that lens as we're designing.
Yeah. And I would say, as we think about all of those individuals that interact with space, that interact in these kinds of conversations, I back to this idea of speaking in draft, I'm also curious other ways that those individuals might find to help us consider inclusive environments in a different way, right? I would say what we've talked about are things that we've started to uncover and dig around and play around in, but I think there's so much more to explore as it relates to what that means in space. So I'm really excited as we have more conversations about this, the creativity that the community is going to find around ways that we can be more thoughtful in how we plan environments.
Yeah, I love that.
So send us your ideas.
Don't be afraid to call it. Jordan, do you have anything else you'd like to add before we wrap it up today?
No, I feel great. I appreciate the conversation today. I always love chatting with you, Dr. Lauren Gant.
Likewise.
And some of the work that we've been able to do in here is some of my favorite that I get to share. So appreciate the time today.
Yeah. So I just appreciate having this conversation about, why we feel so important, why we feel like this conversation is so important and why we feel like it's the right time and the right place to have this conversation. And I am just so grateful to have this conversation with you, Jordan. So
thanks,
I look forward to future conversations, and we will be sharing more about trauma-informed design in the next episodes of Tell Me More. So stay tuned, and thanks for joining.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of another fascinating episode of Tell Me More. We hope you enjoyed this deep dive into the world of design and innovation. If you're hungry for more insights and stories, make sure to subscribe to Tell Me More on your preferred podcast platform. As we sign off, remember that the conversation doesn't end here. Connect with us on social media at Allsteel and share your thoughts, questions, or even your favorite moments from the podcast. We love hearing from our engaged and curious audience. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we'll continue exploring the Design to Do More philosophy. Until then, thanks for listening.